So it's very interesting, also, Nakamura Sensei, that I think, you know, the end of the Romantic era, or Romanshuki, and the beginning, a little bit into the Victorian era, is possibly, do you agree, the last period where there was the idea of, you know, we call it, you know, the Renaissance man or the Renaissance woman. Somebody can be a poet like Goethe, but also has scientific theories, also attends scientific lectures, or you could also have, you know, like Sir Humphrey Davy, he wrote poetry too, you know, Erasmus Darwin, he had a theory, he was Charles Darwin's grandfather, he had a theory of evolution, which is quite close to Lamarckian evolution, but he was also a poet. I mean, he wrote about the life of plants and, you know, botany and so on. Would you agree that's possibly the last period of this kind of Renaissance idea, which is what we, as living ideas, we want to capture just a little bit of that, you know, somebody like Da Vinci, who is, you know, able to be an inventor and an anatomist and an artist, and, you know, the true Bunri, or science and culture. What do you think about that?
Maybe the compartmentalizations of knowledge began to in the early 19th century or so, and accordingly, the professionalization was also instituted in the university curriculum around the same time. And then, so the combination of the whole knowledge, including religion, will no longer be treated within only by one person, but every branch of knowledge should be compartmentalized to other fields of context. So maybe this happens maybe took place around early 19th century or early Victorians.
Perhaps we have a chance to discuss this further after your talk. Do you think you're going to talk for about 20 or 30 or 40 minutes?
Maybe 20 or so. Yeah.
20 or so. Then we'll open it up.
Also, as you see from the talking up to now, I'm not English, not so fluent, and maybe it took some time to think and stop to think and express my ideas. So I'm happy if you exchange ideas or interfere with me during my talk. It's no problem.
So yeah, just once again, just to briefly say, yes, please, you know, feel extremely welcome. We're very, very privileged and pleased that you've come all this way from Osaka to talk to our little Living Ideas group. Thanks very much, and please begin.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you to Peter for this kind invitation and kind introduction and to this wonderful seminar. So, okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself briefly, and I've already thought about that. But and from this year, I start my own new Kakenhi project, in which I will be going to work on the early Victorian paleontological or anatomical studies in terms of the romantic context. So this is just what I'm going to do now. And this talk is also for me the first occasion for this project.
Oh, sorry. How do you say paleontology in Japanese?
古生物学。
古生物学, thank you.
古い生物学。Okay. But as I told you before, I'm just an amateur student of science and, of course, relating knowledge. So I'm glad if you help me about the expertise information. Okay, and as my own teaching experience, okay. I'm now teaching English as well as some medical humanities subjects like medical narrative medicine or the history of medicine in terms of in the combination of literature. I have a class in which I teach how literary imagery or literary aspects of the medical topics were represented throughout the European history. So my interest for this topic is also part from my teaching experiences too. So in that sense, my talk will be also interdisciplinary as my own theme. Okay, so let me start today's topic by mentioning some lines from some of Coleridge's poems, famous poem, Religious Musings, which is quoted, and I happen to find it, quoted in Richard Owen's On the Nature of Limbs, published in 1849, which is on page 1. I read a bit. It is the sublime of man, our known majesty, to know ourselves, parts and proportions of a wondrous whole. And Owen quotes these lines in the context of criticizing the mechanistic approaches of organisms. For example, classifying natural things according to their function and artificially classified into the categories, but especially based on the linear category, linears, right? Linear botany, or Cuvier's categorizations of vertebrates. And Owen criticizes these artificial or mechanical classification, and he instead proposes more organic and holistic understanding of the whole structure of the natural livings. And then he quotes these lines. And why does he quote these lines in that context of the medical anatomy? And I want to argue that this issue, not from the romantic aspects of romantic imagery of nature, but as a methodological problems of how to think about nature. And Coleridge's idea of imagination is, in my view, partly comes from the scientific context in which how to reconstruct experience or the natural world into a unified form. And this definition of romantic imagination was inherited into Richard Owen. And so Owen's quotation of these lines is not only concerned with romantic imagery of nature, but just methodological or historically problems. And that's this is the point I want to emphasize throughout this talk. And let's go into more detail. Okay, so go on to the Coleridge's definition of imagination on page 2. And there he distinguishes two types of imagination, but that is not important for this topic. I want to emphasize here, what I want to emphasize here is imagination here is regarded as the power of not producing something totally new from nothing, but the power of reorganizing or repeating something, that is already known in the world of experience into a newly reconstructed or new form of knowledge, right? Let me read a bit. For example, in the third line, a repetition in the finite mind of eternal act of creation in the infinite I am, or it dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate. And in fact, this idea of thinking some empirical phenomena in a reconstructed pattern of thought, pattern of form, is just what the 18th century scientists began to realize, especially in order to explain or understand some natural phenomena that cannot be explained by inductive form or just by collecting data and generalizing patterns, or as I said, linear or Cuvier way of thinking. So Coleridge's imagination is can be regarded as a focal point of how the scientific approaches to nature or even things. Okay. So sorry, I want to share the that's the one. I'm sorry.
Share the PowerPoint with the people on Zoom. Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm now adjusting the screen.
That's all right. That gives everybody a chance to reflect in the English and Japanese, of his very important definition of imagination. Or, well.
Maybe to take some time, so
Also, this handout, I think I emailed it to all of the people, including those who are on Zoom. So maybe I'll upload this to the website. Anybody who is watching the Zoom after the event will be able to see this and follow later, and I'll put it on the Living Ideas website. But people who are at other universities live should probably have a copy of this anyway, so yes. Please
I'm sorry, David, let's resume my talk. And I want to trace back or sketch out how Coleridgean imagination or its earliest form appeared in the history of science in the late 18th century. And I want to start by Goethe's morphology and followed by Cuvier's debate. And also, philosophically, a philosophical point of view, I want to refer to Kant's argument about how to justify the teleological argument about organism or biology. And then I want to go further to the British anatomist Joseph Henry Green, who is a disciple of Coleridge, and then Richard Owen. But there's enough time, so just sketch out.
Okay.
Yeah, great. And Goethe's morphology, which is on page 5. And he's, of course, famous for the giant literature in the pre-romantic or Enlightenment era, but he was also an enthusiastic naturalist. And he wrote many papers on animals or plants or morphological or anatomical studies. And his point is that one must, in order to understand the whole nature of the living world, one must understand the common pattern within the diversity of natural things. And he called this pattern an archetype. And an archetype can be a concept or hypothetical concept that cannot be proved, but he set up this hypothesis from which every kind of species, every kind of plant or animals can be explained from. And he claims for the importance of the creative and imitative urges. Contemplative or intuitive or imaginative power on the observer's side. So observers, it is not enough for observers to just observe and collect and generalize using data, but imaginatively grasp the whole nature or whole essence of the living patterns. And this idea is then was developed in the Etienne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire. And he was also a morphologist in Paris, but which was in the later generations, but Geoffroy on the page 8, and Geoffroy is also developed an idea that organism structure is a modified form of some hidden pattern or uniform type. And he examined abundance of materials in order to find out common patterns, for example, between the different species of animals, or even between the vertebrates or invertebrates. So sometimes he went so far as strange or too speculative or theories. For example, in order to find a common pattern between invertebrate and vertebrates, he considered that, for example, the legs and arms of insects is a modified form of the vertebrate's leg, right? So these are just the same form. And so insects have the outer ribs, and with these ribs they walk. Yeah, this idea is, of course, ridiculous.
Very fanciful.
Yeah, fanciful. Yeah, that's right. And this fanciful idea could be imaginative theory. And these approaches to finding some patterns, even if they are not have clear evidence of foundations, contributed to the development of comparative anatomy and paleontology, because in these fields there have been not much enough evidence. These scientists had to reconstruct the whole structure from partial evidence, right? So these speculative or imaginative approaches could be essential for them. And this is Geoffroy's idea of type and uniform pattern, or in his words, analogy could be an effective tool. And his concept of analogy is now in modern biological terms called homology. I mean, homology is the common pattern between two different organisms that have the same origin. And an analogy is the similarities between the two different things that have no, just on the form, similarities based on the form. And analogical thinking in modern sense is just what Cuvier approaches.
By the way, why does it look like in this picture on the bottom of page 8, below Geoffroy, why does it look like the human skeleton has a long tail? Is that a fanciful addition?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
I thought it was a mermaid or something like that. So again, that's possibly an example of him being very fanciful and playing with reality.
So yeah, that's just what interests Cuvier as an homologous structure or homologous imagery of these different species. On the other hand, Cuvier, just on page 7, is attempt to classify vertebrates depending on its function, not form. So, for example, this is not what Cuvier did, but just an example. For example, classifying depending on form is, for example, the wing of an insect and the wing of a bird. This is the same function for flying, but these are not organically or evolution, and it's not the same common origins in the development of species. This is what Cuvier's approaches do. So Cuvier's approach is in a sense artificial or sometimes or rigidly systematic way, and that could be an understandable or easy to explain, but from the history of biological point of view, Geoffroy's approach is more closer to the modern evolutionary ideas. So, and this debate between Cuvier and Geoffroy ended in Cuvier's victory at that time because of Cuvier's more positivistic and he demonstrated functional similarities between other animals. But looking back from now modern perspective, Geoffroy's approach, speculative as it is, could be a good factor to drive as a driving force for evolutionary idea with the power of imaginative way of thinking to nature. Okay, so let us go to the Kant's argument, which is a bit difficult, and I'm not sure I could explain well. But anyway, according to Kant, let me read a part of my paper. Biology is, unlike physics or other material science, biology is likely to be regarded as unscientific because we cannot explain living things or living or natural organisms only from a mechanical point of view. And this is because living organism generates or develops or changes just as if they have their own will or intentions or designs, but it is not what it is. And so Kant argued that by pretending or assuming that nature is something purposive being, so that we can explain the nature has developed or changes towards that purpose. This is what the philosophical foundation of the biological explanation of life. And in order to do this teleological purposive explanations of natural or living things, Kant emphasized the importance of using analogies or hypotheses, and which he regards as a venture of reason, daring venture of reason, which is on the page 10. And so Kant regards this approach is unscientific or out of the limit of the reason, activity of reason, but it is important to understand the biological biological phenomena. And the Kant's argument on the analogy or hypothesis in the field of biology is just closely related to the imagination, which is reconstruction of the natural things and finding out some common pattern within the diversity of things, so that each individual species can develop or grow into some purpose, which is in Kant's words intellectual archetype. this is the final purpose of the living things in Kant's view. And the concept of archetype is therefore developed from Goethe, Joffre, and by way of Kant, and then these ideas is flowed into the British Romanticism too. And I want to show how it happened in the Joseph Henry Green and Richard Owen. Okay, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I finished just a brief look at the Green and Owen. And Green is a Coleridge's disciple. They met in the late 1810s, and then he repeated the philosophical dialogues and deepened their knowledge, not only anatomy or physiology or comparative anatomy, but also aesthetics and or German idealism. So both these two figures have much in common in their own text, Green's anatomical text and Coleridge's philosophical or political text. And I'll show some of this example in the page 12 to 13. But let me just refer to the page 13. This is an interesting example of how Coleridge's applies to the Green's comparative anatomical ideas to the political argument. This is quite curious to see. And in the context of how the British Constitution has developed and evolved through the historical back and forth or deviations, but the British has evolved into some purposes. Coleridge discusses how this is happened under the guidance of an idea or imaginative driving force. And then he, in order to justify this theory, he suddenly refers to the comparative anatomy's insights. This is just what is indicated in the in this quotation on the page 13. And here we can see the homological arguments. And maybe Coleridge himself could never have been learned from comparative anatomy by himself, so it must be without proof. So maybe this is a product of the dialogue with Green. But anyway, this quotation illustrates how the comparative anatomy and British Romantic ideas were intersected with each other. Okay, and then Richard Owen, he was followed by Green and became the Royal College of Surgeons anatomist or an Hunterian lecturer, and he also developed his own version of archetype. What is characteristic of his idea is that his archetype is just a rather Platonic or metaphysical or even theological. So in a sense, his archetypal argument is conservative, or go back to the older idea of the nature.
Sorry, may I ask, when Owen presented his archetype, did he cite Goethe as a previous source?
Directly, he cites German transcendental anatomists, as it usually called.
Natural philosophy? Is it?
Yeah, for example, Karl Oken and I forgot Kielmeyer, or this is
Right.
just very minor names. But these names are just the direct inspirations of Owen. But these figures also bases their own argument upon maybe Goethe's more political arguments. So the Owen's archetypes argument is on the page 16, and we can find that. Let me read the underlying part. Nature has advanced with slow and stately steps, guided by the archetypal light, amidst the wreck of worlds, from the first embodiment of vertebrate idea and its old utility, the fish vestment, until it became arrayed in the glorious garb of human form. So, Owen's philosophy is based on the idea that the life development finally reaches the humans in the scale of nature. And these developmental stages are realized or represented in each species or each vertebrate. But every species are aimed toward the realizations of its final form, humans. This is what Owen was speaking to at the end. So we can find this idea as an illustration on as I show in the page 17. And this illustration shows how archetypal form developed through different species and until finally to human forms. And on the top, from top right illustration, just like a worm or fish or something like that, this is archetypal vertebrate. So exactly not the fish, but the vertebrate's original form is as according to Owen, and then fish and reptile and mammals, and then bird and human is. We can see the common pattern is at work just on the gray colored part, but how it develops from archetypal or to the upper or higher stages. And these are what Owen is believed in the archetypal argument. And so in these arguments, the point is, in these arguments, Owen quotes Coleridge's religious musings idea of nature or the human's relationships with nature. So in a sense, a romantic imaginative way of thinking it contributed to a productive understanding of natural things, dynamic understanding. But on the other hand, it ended in Owen's metaphysical or Platonic arguments, just as in this illustration. So we can see from this illustration or Owen's quotation or commitment to Coleridge's idea of imagination that how romantic idea of thinking could be have its own possibility as well as its limitations in the development of comparative anatomical studies. And finally, let me just mention Owen's archetype, however, also inspired Charles Darwin. And on the page 18, this is just a Darwin's handwritten note on this Owen's on the nature of limbs. And Darwin, was greatly inspired by Owen's idea of archetype, a basic form of vertebra, and he develops these archetypal arguments into his own theory of evolution. Okay, so these so far just gave a rough sketch of the romantic imaginative way of thinking of.
Could you please just read out and explain Darwin's note?
Yeah.
Very interesting, this connection.
Yeah. Darwin, from these notes, Darwin expressed his wonder, or as well as perplexity, of course, but wonder and admiration of Owen's insight of archetype. I read some the lines. I look at Owen's archetypes as more than ideal. So this is not ideal or speculative theory for Darwin, but rather the actual or it symbolizes how the evolutionary or development of life could have taken place. This is good for Darwin, could be an effective concept for sorry, the evolutionary process of of living life could be found in under the concept by when we refer to the concept of archetype. This is what maybe what Darwin was inspired.
It's fascinating to read this. I mean, in his imagination, in Darwin's imagination, what could this kind of archetype, for example, the archetype of the vertebrate, what could it be? I mean, I'm thinking, is he like anticipating a genetic code? Is he anticipating DNA? I mean, what could it be? Is it something materially codified in, you know, the living body? Or is it some kind of Platonic archetype? But he says it's not ideal, it's a real. And by real, I think he means something like concrete, living, actually biological material. So is he sort of anticipating some kind of DNA there? What do you think?
As far as I know, the evolutionary theory was scientifically evidenced by the later discovery of genetic understanding.
The new synthesis of the 20th century, Mendel and Darwin, yes.
And as far as Darwin did, he just explored the abundance of evidence and tried to find out just as Owen did, common structure, how these similarities and deviations and differences are now what they are now. And these naturalist approaches led to the evolutionary theory, but he felt the need to give ground for these explanations. Why different species have similarities, or why one species have the variations, subspecies, or
or even ones that are very far apart, which is even stronger reason for imagining some kind of archetype.
Yes, that's right. So archetype for Darwin is of course a hypothetical concept, but by using or referring to the archetypal idea of reconstructing the differences under one or common pattern, Darwin believes that every diversity or similarities among the different species.
This note just strikes me as just very rich, promising, and beautiful, and it's a sort of scientific, intellectual foresight, bringing together a kind of ancient Platonic notion of the form or the idea or the archetype, the kind of thing that Coleridge was writing about. As a mysterious but cosmic principle of the universe, and Darwin says, and it's real, it's actual, it's, he's anticipating the DNA, which he knew already he needed, it's beautiful, yes, it's a great thing, it's a great piece to to conclude with, the talk. Yes. And you've concluded there?
Okay.
Yeah, I've received an email from Silpa Sensei saying she doesn't have the link, or the link that I gave was wrong.
Oh.
Can I just repeat the link that I have? 81944. Is that correct? Is that the correct one?
I think so. Yeah, you're involved using that.
I was able to
8191442. 5411. There's a one missing. There's a one missing at the end. So, okay. Okay. Please raise your hand if you have a question, or just talk up.
English. Thank you for your presentation. I'm not good at English, so please be much better. And I just impression. I have just impression. Oh, sorry. I have seen. I know. I found a similar idea in art theory. Jonathan Craigie, do you know Jonathan Craigie?
Grady, how do you spell the
Jonathan
name?
Craigie, Jonathan Craigie,
C-R-A-D-Y, Grady?
Craigie.
Mhm.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm not so
Ah, okay.
correct, but anyway, and Harry Foster, he is editor of MIT Press,
Mm.
and I read several books about visual theory. It talks about from Renaissance mechanical optical theory to physiological
Mhm.
visual theory, like Goethe.
Mm.
So just I have impression what you talk about is very similar to the topic of art theory. From geometrical optical concept to physiological concept like retina. Part we focus on movement of light, wave of light, but like Newton, but in 19th century, because of appearance of physiology, the idea has changed to physiological idea, and because of that, cinema has invented. We must consider about retinal phenomena. After image is very important. After image is only belongs to human body. It's not an optical idea. I can't explain.
So, well, because of the after image, a series of still images becomes a motion picture. Yeah.
So after image is
Do other animals have that? Do they? Are humans unique with
no, all of animals
Yes,
have
after
after image phenomena, but it doesn't connection with light theory like Newton.
yes.
So
Biological.
biological phenomena.
Yes.
So I think it is very similar to what you said. Just my impression. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Great observation.
An example of analogical understanding of between the cinematic representation and the optical mechanism of the organism.
So from perspective to cinema, there is a great difference between Renaissance perspective and cinematic theory. Both are completely
And this kind of it's almost like there's two reasons for this theory coming up in film theory. I mean, one is because of the very great importance of the mechanics and physiology of sight and the after image, which makes films possible. Because and so you have to understand that to some extent if you're in the production and the technical side of film. But also there's another reason, as Akira Kurosawa said, motion pictures is the only art, he believed, because he's so proud of movies, you know, motion pictures is the only art which encompasses almost all of the arts. So you have to care so much about the music, you have to care so much about painting in a way, and the photography and its own cinematography and the theatrics of, you know, and the mise en scène and all of these special issues. And that links back to that whole Renaissance idea. When you have an art which encompasses all of the arts and it's got that element of science for its possibility, that's how the Renaissance, in a sense, person continues. So maybe people in the film industry are the new, or at least one example of the continuation of the Renaissance man and the Renaissance woman, having to be expert in several fields or.
That's my answer. Thank you very much for a good suggestion.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Yeah, so did the person like Owens and the Green have a chance to change the idea with with the philosophist or the biologist? I don't know, the person, so the European continent. So I just thought, so the late 19th century, Edo period here in Japan. And I think here in Japan, so we have, Japan had a lot of knowledge from the Holland, and I have seen the similar archetype here for me. So I just thought they have some chance to change the idea with the European continent, or do they have the influence from the other European countries?
Thank you. One of the things I can explain about your question is Owen's case, and he was originally studying the archetypal and he first distinguished homology and analogy in a modern distinction in 1843. And when he's examining invertebrate specimens. But in 1844, he met Carus, as I mentioned earlier, in the talk, from the German transcendental anatomist. And Carus is also a follower of Goethe and Kant and other transcendental or idealist influences. And after met Owen Hoston met Carus in 1844, he began to explore the conceptual approach to the vertebrates with the concept of archetype, and which is clearly under the influence of Carus.
Could you quickly give us his definition of the distinction between homology in biology or anatomy and analogy?
Not sure, but
I think it's something to do with analogy. Analogous organs in different animals and different species have the same function, whereas homology have the same beginning. They look the same, but might not do the same thing.
Yeah.
Where like a flying squirrel might have a homology with parts of the human anatomy, but they have a totally, but they're not really analogous, but they're homologous. Or analogy is a similarity in function. Homology is a similarity in like an embryonic.
Yes. So
Between different species.
For example, the wing of an insect and the wings of a bird.
Yes, they're not related genetically in a Darwinian sense, but they share the same functions.
Now, homology is similarity.
You could say shared evolution.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
They begin from the same embryonic structure, or
I know just the technical term, but I can't well explain it. Phylogenetic.
yes, phylogenetic. Yes,
Phylogenetics.
the same strain of evolution. Yes.
Evolutionary.
So they share the ancestry. They share the same ancestry.
That's right.
So the wings of a bird have no common ancestor relevantly with the wings of an insect,
Yes,
but they are analogous.
Yeah,
Whereas the wings of a flying squirrel share with humans some kind of homology, even though we can't fly and so on. Yes.
And what Chopra did was the homological categorization between the different species of animals.
And that was, he was being fanciful when he said insects' ribs are like, for example, humans or bats or foxes' legs and so on.
So,
But he was fanciful because he didn't know the distinction, maybe. But if he had the distinction, then he wouldn't have been, if he had Owen's distinction, it wouldn't have been fanciful, it would have just been, it would have just been an illustration. So there's a big difference in a sense there between, you know, an idea which gets rejected because it's too fanciful. But if you just have one distinction, you know, a distinction in the mind is a useful scientific tool, then it doesn't, then it's not fanciful anymore. You're just saying, this is an illustration, it's an analogy.
So homology contains some speculative or hypothetical elements. And this is what, as you questioned earlier, Owen acquired from the German philosophical.
Shimane and Orken and others.
And these figures all shared the idea of the need to find some common pattern within the knowledge, and the archetype is just intended to reorganize this pattern.
It's just a wonderful period. This early and Victorian era and the late Romantic of, as we said in the very beginning, of the very idea of living ideas, sharing the culture and the literature and ideas about analogy, Platonic philosophy from 2000 and something years earlier, all very active, and people from a laboratory are able also to consult novels for inspiration. You have the important biologists quoting lines of poetry. It just doesn't really happen that much nowadays, and yet the inspiration there is tremendous. And any other comments or questions or thoughts?
So yeah, any question from Zoom?
I hope they've all got the right link. I apologize for having made a mistake earlier.
Sorry, nine question.
Good.
I love the idea that imagination inspires philosophers and scientists equally, and interrupt each other, and the science shaped based on imaginative discussions. But I'm afraid now imagination is prohibited.
Yeah. All right.
I always wondered how Darwin could present his theory of evolution in
Today?
and the society in the
Yeah.
19th century.
Oh.
Because
Yeah.
his theory was based on nothing, virtually nothing. You just imagine it. Now, I can't make a proposal of presentation in a society without any evidence. So what could you say about the current situation?
Yeah, this is also related to my knowledge, but Darwin first started the collection of the materials in order to
From Galapagos Islands and so on. When he was on the ship, the Beagle.
Which is in 1830s, late 1830s, started maybe 1837, afterwards, and for a few years. And then he already had evolutionary ideas at that point of stage, but he was also, as you see, afraid how to publish this idea, because the evolutionary theory is totally contradict with the Anglican idea of the natural world.
Creator God.
Yeah, and opposed to, not only opposed to natural world, but also the contemporary scientific idea of nature, because there are no evidence, as you say, or based on a Cuvier or Linnean idea of nature. Darwin or Owens or Garter's approaches with too speculative. So, but Darwin already perceived his own theory is quite important. So it took several years, maybe 10 or more years, to publish that. And he left during these years. He left many notes about this. And then in these notes, I found some approaches by Darwin to explain these evolutionary ideas by design or God's hands sometimes. But
sometimes he's seriously taking these questions. He believes it himself sometimes.
Yes. So in Owen's approaches, Platonic approaches, but finally when he published a theory of evolution, the
origin of species.
But even the origin of species was published and republished several times, edited with some expressions, including metaphorical expressions or edited. So Darwin had been always struggling to publish or explain idea. How under the limited availability of evidence. Yeah, yes.
It has also been remarked that in the 20th and 21st centuries that Darwin also had logic on his side, and some people, for example, philosophers, have said actually the theory of evolution by natural selection is a logical tautology. It's almost mathematic. But more than that, it's logical. Members of a species have to be alive to be able to physically reproduce, and therefore the ones that are fit enough to survive until reproduction age and are able to reproduce, their genetic material will be passed on. And the ones that die off before that age, their genetic material will leave the gene pool, although he didn't use those sort of what we might call Mendelian terms. So he had, in a sense, he had logic on his side too. And I think that's what we have nowadays. When we have something that is quite imaginative and speculative, I think you back it up by the logic of it, you know, which is still understood to be quite rigorous, you know. But yes.
Thank you very much.
But it's a very great question. How imagination is. There seems to be, you know, in applying for grants and so on, there's a lot less space for imagination in the various sciences and humanities. Often, anyway. Yeah, you can often get that impression. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? What about the space of imagination in mathematics? Have you got anything to say about that, or?
Well, you can always formulate a conjecture, you know, about anything.
Yes.
It's good if you have, you know, some evidence supporting that conjecture. And, you know, you are free to do this, but it's sort of embarrassing if somebody very quickly refutes that, because, you know, the big stuff is, you know, disappears. Well, I'm sorry. So one thing I was starting to think related to your thought, this, you know, romantic era, how does that influence mathematical theory? And you know, what you said this regarding to anatomy and how people thought about that, how that if it, you know, change mathematics.
Who are the big names in that period? Can you tell
I'm
us?
not really good about that, but
okay.
I Googled romanticism and the development of mathematics, and there are, you know, stuff about this online. So some people had the same kind of question. And, you know, it could be something.
I mean, terms like infinity. I mean, you know, I mean, people like William Blake and other romantic, you know, poets were, you know, what is it? What is it? To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. And I think in that romantic era, you know, some mathematicians might have been inspired to think more about infinity and eternity. And
yeah, it's quite possible. Yeah, it's quite possible, and you know, it could be.
People have often remarked about mathematics is actually the study of beauty. Some people have, I mean, many thousands of people have said that. But anyway.
Maybe your point is the least discussed aspect of romanticism. Maybe I have never heard about romantic aspect of it.
Get it in there with your Kakendi project. Get it in there.
This is a new field that is to be much explored. But I don't have a clear and fixed idea, but maybe in the late 18th century, the problem of probability in the field of mathematics is well discussed, and some pre-romantic philosophers, or for example, Hume or Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, and other related persons, maybe deals with these problems because the Hume or Scottish Enlightenment philosophers consider how knowledge should be created with basic foundation, with much evidence, and this is just what a probability problem is deal with too. So these figures maybe are closely related to what you are thinking about. Yeah, sorry.
And Immanuel Kant asking about, how is it possible, that we can have, synthetic a priori knowledge? Isn't that what mathematics is?
Yes.
A priori knowledge that you can get without any kind of experience. It's just a priori. And yet it's a synthesis. You're in a sense producing new knowledge, or is it new forms of knowledge that you're producing? The Romantic era was in many ways ushered in by people thinking about the challenges of Immanuel Kant, and I think that question has a strong bearing there.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or thoughts, or we could sort of branch this out a little bit to relate to what we were talking about in the beginning. Just the very concept of living ideas and then interdisciplinarity and so on. Here we have people, who didn't have to start a specific seminar like we're trying to do. They were doing it naturally. They would just very naturally, a poet could talk to a natural science. In fact, did you know that the term scientist, which was coined in Britain by William Whewell, who was a friend of Coleridge, and Coleridge said to William Whewell, you should think of a different term than natural philosopher, because philosophy is one thing, and then this empirical kind of knowledge and inductive kind of knowledge that you're doing is a different thing. Newton was classified as a philosopher, but actually he was a scientist. But he's classified as a philosopher because the term scientist didn't exist until something like 1840 or 1837 or
Before
1830. The year of Coleridge's death. Right. And that was instigated upon, although Coleridge didn't coin the term, he said to his friend, you should think of another term to use. So then scientist,
this is a symbolical event.
Yeah.
Which the professionalization of scientists.
Yeah, because we were all philosophers before then. We were all philosophers, including the people in the RICO, the science department, etc. And so the connections, they could go to each other's lectures quite easily. They could even give each other's lectures, or I suppose, in some, that's stretching it a little bit. But they'd be in each other's labs and rooms and, common rooms, etc. All laboring away in their different branches of philosophy. So although the specialization is an important thing in an organicist sense. Different limbs and parts of the body each have their different job, just like in a university. When the central nervous system, when there's no central nervous system, when there's no organizing principle, then things just become scattered. And so instead of having a strong hand, you have a severed hand, which is useless in a way. Do you think by the mid to late Victorian era, people were worrying about specialization? Do you think is it? It must have happened. I just can't put my finger on. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Not everybody was worried about that. Maybe there are indeed certainly some professionalized minds in the Victorian scientific community.
Yes. Coleridge himself, well before this, absolutely distinct specialization, was complaining in letters, and I think it was in the Constitution of the Church and the State, He was complaining about the specialization of the many new universities. You know, there were new universities springing up in London and around Britain, which were, in a sense, like technical schools and technical colleges, producing producers, that is to say, producing people working for the commercialization of knowledge and industry. And so because these places are not producing knowledge, they're not producing philosophers and scientists per se, but they're producing technologists and technocrats. And there's his response to that crisis was we should have a clerisy, which means, as you know, in every village and in every part of every town, we should have, just like the church has priests all over and they're able to spread the word of their religion, but in a different way, the clerisy will have, a poet here and a scientist there and a philosopher here and a social theorist there in every town and village. Well, that eventually became, the universal school system, but still that didn't exist in his day. But there's a humanitarian need to spread a kind of unified sense of knowledge, rather than just focusing on being expert in some part of industry or technology, so that your mind will be able to grasp the cosmos in its own little way, with a bit of poetry and a bit of technology and a bit of science and so on. And I often wonder, is that sense a little bit missing today? Often in Britain, for example, at schools, children can learn their mathematics and their kokugo or English and their geography and history, etc. But then there's a relatively new subject called general studies, and people often laugh at that. Ha ha ha! You have a certificate in general studies. But actually, that's the kind of thing, it's the idea of the unification of knowledge, the central nervous system, the brain putting everything together. And I don't think it should be laughed at.
Maybe these arguments about unifying education has been repeating again and again.
For hundreds of years, maybe.
Yeah, for example, C.P. Snow's argument about two cultures.
Who's? C.P. Snow. Yes.
And even now we are under the stress of the productivity or academic pure.
Yes. Well, I think technology and the advance of science has had just in a few hundred years has been so rapid that the humanitarians, in a sense, haven't really been able to catch up so strongly, possibly. And the funding all goes to the sciences and the technologies, and they just want it more specialized. Sorry, Hamada Sensei.
Yeah, Nagaoka Sensei had a question. So, Nagaoka Sensei?
Do we need to turn up the volume?
すいません。Hello, please. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. So firstly, Nakamura Sensei, thank you very much for the thought-provoking and the informative lecture. I'm still thinking about some of the things that rather inspired me. And I don't know where to start, but first of all, we talked about Darwin's revolutionary theory, right? And basically, it is considered as, connecting things, basically. So in the very first picture that Nakamura Sensei showed us is, as Peter mentioned, it's a skeleton of mermaid, which is not real. But one thing that we notice is that, so people try to connect something that we know to something that we don't. I've been curious about what a stranger is, what that strange can be. And so I don't know how to go on, but one of the arguments that you had is, the difference between homology and analogy, and the importance or the significance of imagination. And probably, that's where ideology or cultural values may break in. I mean, the gap between homology and analogy. When we try to, human beings try to connect things with something that we know. I mean, connecting things that we don't with something that we do. There maybe something other things are also at work. And Hamada Sensei, can I have a, can I be a host so that I can share a window or something? I can do that now. It seems so.
If you can go to a computer screen, you can see what's happening. My girl sends
Okay, am I sharing a window now? So this is a famous picture of, now discrimination of the Irish people from the other, Anglo-Saxon people. So we can say that this is also another example of connecting things, but probably not really scientifically. But this quite analogous to Darwin's kind of revolutionary theory, and also I think so. The probably archetype, the idea of archetype is one of the fundamental things that enable us to connect things that we don't know with things that we know, and by doing that, but without any, well, so this is what you've been talking about. So what the science is and what the cultural imagination is. And another thing is that, like in Japan, we didn't connect everything. For example, we had these yokai things, which are quite, we think are quite totally different things from human beings. And also in the Celtic imagination, they had those fairies, which are also quite different. So they are not systematized, or they are not familiarized as something, part of this human nature. So, the I don't know where to go, but still. It's a kind of system of making the strange, or system of, so the idea of archetype, or the idea of theological thinking, teleological thinking itself, the purposeful thinking or wish, including wish, is also the part of the thing that make or familiarizes the things that are not actually really familiar, but so maybe I would say that, like the wizards, the story of a wizard and other things, the strange, we also have them, but they are not really, systematized into the part of the science probably. But that talk that you gave us today is kind of, evocative of the very gap between the imaginative or the stranger and the familiar. So maybe I should say, could I have any comments, Nakamura Sensei?
Thank you very much. Very inspiring and comment, and very interesting illustrations. And I just say or suggest the argument on archetype is likely to be ideologically conservative. Maybe because scientists or the nation or some other group of people want to unify or make strangers familiar, as you say. And so what is strange should be made familiar is the
people's desire to understand what is not in them within themselves under a known pattern. And indeed, Owen's argument, or Owen himself was in his later years conservative stance, to take a conservative stance compared to Darwin's progressive idea by evolutionary theory. And
Did Owen oppose Darwin's?
yes, that's right. Yeah. In spite of the fact that Owen's archetype was one of the inspirations of Darwin's theory, but Owen himself opposed to the evolutionary theory, or he never admits that transmutation of species, one species converted into other species. These ideas are not what Owen believed to the end. So Owen's ideological aspect is maybe well represented in archetypal argument in itself, and maybe these ideas comes from German and British rather than French. Could be some reasons for that, and could be Linnaeus or rather liberal or more radical approaches in terms of the scientific understanding of nature. Yeah, and so I'm not sure this is
I mean, I think a danger also comes from Nagaoka Sensei's question, in that when you start using an archetype, which is some kind of, intellectual form as a guiding principle, then okay, that's wonderful for somebody who has great scientific integrity and great philosophical integrity. But when you have somebody who has very questionable prejudices, such as racism. So when they have an archetype, in a sense, guiding science is like a kind of hunch, an intuition that you think you're following, and you think that's some kind of archetype. But if you believe that the Irish are inferior, or some other race, or there's no such thing as race in that, but some other ethnicity or whatnot is inferior, you kind of believe that you're following an archetype, but actually you're just trying to prove your own prejudice. And I think there's a danger. I mean, I think that was maybe implicit in your question, or a possibility.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Pisa. That is it. Well, thank you, Nakamura Sensei. I have to have more time to think about this. I'm a slow learner, but thank you so much.
Introducing the question of the strange was nice and interesting. That again unites literature, especially the fantastical sides of it, yokai and fairies and so on, unites literature and the philosophical and biological kind of thoughts that are going on there, like Geoffroy, we have the strange is right in front of us here.
And that is also to connect the imaginary to the scientific, probably. So, and we also have to think of the gap, or we are made aware to the existence of the gap, this leaping point between the two genres.
People say about, many professors in physics say about quantum physics, if you think you understand it, then you absolutely don't.
So
and they've even got quantum particles. One of the quantum particles or qualities is called strange, I believe. Isn't there a quark called strange or something? I'm completely out of my depth here. But strangeness, people cite this idea of quantum strangeness. So I think it's a pity we don't have any quantum scientists, quantum physicists in our group. But I think the idea of imaginative stretches towards the strange are exactly what people make room for if they're studying string theory or quantum physics and indeterminacy and that sort of thing. Maybe we need to make room for one of those people sometimes. I can try and invite somebody to give a talk there. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or thoughts? Or from online? Okay. Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Rather than just simply stopping, I think we can just, go into more relaxed and casual conversation. We'll probably go into having some snacks and so on, which might be an opportunity for us to turn off the recording.